Hi, this is Tania Johnson from the Institute of Child Psychology. I am the co-founder and a registered psychologist. Today we're going to be talking about navigating technology and children. This is a hot topic and it's so incredibly difficult for so many parents to really know how to help their children navigate a new technological world. So often we go to professionals and we say, how do I do this with my child? How many minutes per day? How do I keep a close, connected relationship with my child when everything feels so stressful when it comes to technology? So today we're going to look at some guidelines, but I'm going to pull back first and say that we need to stop looking at the professionals as I talk to you today, but we need to stop looking at professionals to help us navigate technology in our homes and instead start to connect with who we really are and what's important to us. What we know about technology and guidelines, when they come from places like the American Academy of Pediatrics, is that it's very, very hard for families to follow them if we don't connect. As a clinician, when I have clients and families come into my therapy room, one of the areas that I know that they're least likely to be honest with me is when it comes to technology, particularly for parents around their own technology use. And so what I'm going to ask you to do with me right now, we will go through some of the guidelines on how to help our kids, but what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to just put all of that aside for the moment, to sit quietly for me and to really connect with what's important to you. One day when you're in your senior years and you're in a rocking chair and you're thinking back on your life with your family, what is it that you want for your family? Think about that. For some people, they may think of values. For some people, they may think of experiences. It doesn't matter. What do you want for your family? And then I want you to think about how technology factors into that. With those guidelines, your guidelines that come from you, what do you need to change when it comes to technology in terms of your own use? What do you need to change in terms of your children's use? So I'll give you an example from me. One of my most important values is the power of relationship. And I know that I cannot be fully embodied in a relationship when I have a cell phone in my hand. And so I'm constantly working and constantly failing and constantly working on again, but I'm constantly working on being present. And so when I talk to somebody, I try as hard as I can to make sure that my phone is far away. My children, who are probably the center of my world right now, when it hits 5 o'clock, the notifications go off on my phone. When I sit at a table with somebody, I try very hard to ensure that my phone is far away so that I can be present. Because when I look back on my life, when I'm in my senior years, I want to know that I was there in the moment, fully embodied. And I let the person who was opposite me know, right now, you are the most important person to me. I'm not waiting for a notification on my phone. I'm not distracted by something else. Right now, I am here with you. And so that value of presence made me really think about what I want in terms of some of the limitations of the guidelines in my home. So that includes things like no notifications after 5 o'clock. That includes co-viewing with my children. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's Paw Patrol, but co-viewing with my children. That means not looking at my phone before work. So there's certain guidelines that I've put in place that really stick with me far more than something an organization could offer me. So take those moments to really think about what you need and what your family needs, because you're far more likely to follow through when it comes from your heart. That's our first starting point. And then do it. This is your story. As far as we know, we only have one life. So do it. Do it today. Don't do it tomorrow. It's up to you. You can do it or not do it. It's your life. And right now, technology takes up a huge part of our lives. So decide what you want to do with it and then live that. Okay, so what are the actual guidelines? If you look at guidelines globally, what we've seen is that those guidelines around technology have become a little bit looser. So I'll give you an example from the American Academy of Pediatrics. We used to give very strict guidelines on how many minutes per day children could watch screens or view screens. So we know that COVID has blown everything up and we're all on screens all of the time. When we look at the guidelines that have come out, what we see now is that for our little ones, there are still some numbers around how many minutes per day. But as our kids get older, it's more of a family decision. So for our 0 to 18 months, as an example, we're saying preferably no screens at all. If they need to, they can video chat. There's that COVID piece right there. So we've got our FaceTime. From 18 to 24 months, we're saying if they're going to view screens, we want it to be high quality media. From the ages of 2 to 5, recreational use around screens, about an hour a day. And now this is where it changes dramatically. Once our children get into those elementary school years, junior and high school years, what we're looking at is family media plans. So if you go onto the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have a wonderful family media plan where basically we create a media plan for the whole family. Some of the aspects of that media plan include things like screen-free zones. So a screen-free zone might be a bedroom, as an example. Screen-free times. So we know that children are way more likely to have healthy eating habits when there's no screens at the table. So screen-free time would be meal times. Screen-free times an hour before bed. We know that if we've used screens an hour before bed, it negatively impacts our sleep. So for an example, in our family, one of our goals, we don't always get it right, but one of our goals is to take all of the technology and put it on a power bank in the kitchen. So we keep phones out of bedrooms altogether. So we're looking for agreements for the entire family, not just for the kids, for the entire family on screen-free time, screen-free zones, viewing high-quality media, diversifying our media. And again, the emphasis is on everybody, not just the kids. What we know is that if we are not able to control our technology habits, it's highly unlikely that our kids are going to be able to work with their tech habits. What we live when it comes to tech is what our kids will eventually emulate. What do you want for your children? Live it. So as we start to become more balanced with technology and as we start to root what we do with tech to our values, we start to really look at not just the amount of time that children are spending on tech, but what they're doing with their time. So when we look at a healthy media diet, some of the things that we're looking at are, what are kids doing on media? How much time are they spending in each area? So are they creating digital pictures? Are they working with music? Are they just scrolling through Facebook? Are those choices age appropriate? If they're on iPads, we really want to look at what sort of apps they're using. So educational apps, are they truly educational? Do they engage the child? Are there few distractions? Do they help to bridge learning? Have a look. There's some beautiful websites like the Children's Technology Review, which helps us to really look at whether these apps are doing what they need to be doing. Is there advertising? We don't want that advertising there. And then as much as possible, we want to co-use and co-play with our children. As I said earlier, not all screen time is created equally. So there's usually about 4 areas that we divide screen time into. So there's interactive screen time. This might include something like gaming. There's content creation. So for example, creating digital photos or manipulating different medias. There's passive screen time. So that would be social media. And then there's communication, like video chats, all using different parts of the brain. But really, we want our kids to be engaging and learning from tech, not just absorbing in a passive manner. As we talk about those minutes per day that we often get stuck on, as a clinician, I'm far more interested in a child's balance over a week or over 2 weeks. So if a family comes in and we sit down, and again, we need to be looking at the entire family, but if a family comes in and we sit down and we say, okay, when we look at this person in the family, let's say one of the children, they are engaging in a sport, they're engaging in a passionate pursuit, they have friends that they connect with, they help their community, they're studying, and yes, they're on screens. When I look at that balance over a week, I'm honestly less interested in what a child is doing per day, because really it's about the balance. So for example, we live here in Alberta where it can be freezing. Today it's minus 25. It's highly likely that many children are going to be on their devices more. But when I look across the week, if that balance is there, why am I concerned about what's happening per day? And then I look at 2 weeks, I look at 3 weeks. Really what we want is that balance. And when a child is out of balance somewhere, so we say this child doesn't feel like they have a passion or a purpose, or there's not some sort of activity that they really, really love, then that's where my work is. So how do we help with the balance instead of zoning in and focusing on the tech itself? And that balance needs to be lived by the parents too. So there's been some really wonderful studies about parenting and technology. What we found is that there's 3 types of digital parents. There's our digital limiters, our digital enablers, and our digital mentors. Our digital limiters are attuned to what we might know as authoritarian parents. So there's very strict rules around technology, often aimed top down. So we don't look at the parents' tech use, we're just focused on the kids' tech use. So we say, these are your minutes per day, this is what you may use, this is what you may not use. For many digital limiters, there may even be no tech in the house at all. So those are our digital limiters. Our digital enablers. With our digital enablers, basically there's usually lots of different devices in the house. There's no curfews around tech. Children go to bed with their tech. There's no rules. Everybody's doing their own thing. It's like the wild, wild west when it comes to tech. Our digital mentors. This is akin to authoritative parents. So there are rules in place, but those rules change and morph as the children get older. As our kids become a little bit older, they have a more and more of a voice about how tech is used in the house. Dr. Delaney Ruston has a beautiful example of it, having Tech Tuesday evenings with her kids, where they sit down and they look at technology. They talk about the latest apps that came out. They talk about what rules might need to change in the house when it comes to tech. They share different tech experiences together. So that tech conversation with our digital mentors is ongoing. It's like consent. It's not a one and done. It's a conversation that needs to evolve with our kids. Generally, what we see from digital mentors is that they've co-viewed with their kids. So that's where, right from the beginning, like I mentioned, my girls are little, but it might be Paw Patrol in the beginning. So they've co-viewed, and then they continue to be actively involved in the children's tech experience. We don't suddenly become involved when our kids are 15 and we get worried. This is something that needs to start really, really early. And if our children are older now and we've never been involved, find different ways that aren't all rule enabled, but find different ways to start becoming involved. So our digital mentors have co-viewed and they've co-played with their children. Those family media rules are in place as well for the entire family, not just for the kids. And what they've found is with our digital enablers, our digital limiters, and our digital mentors, that children of digital mentors very obviously have the most positive outcomes when it comes to tech use. So with our digital mentors, like I said, we cannot expect our children to do what we are not doing. So digital mentors tend to walk the walk. They foster an awareness in homes of media, of advertising, of how media is used to often manipulate us. Generally, our digital mentors actively role model selective single tasking. So with many of our kids, what we see is that we've got a phone going, we have an iPad going, we have the TV going at the same time. I heard from one of our experts that our ability to pay attention is one of the best skills that we can teach our children, and it's becoming a lost skill. So our kids actively see us selectively single task in our homes, not just for our kids, but for ourselves. We carve out times and places that are screen free, and we nurture relationships and connection, not just with our kids, but with our family, with friends, and with community. Relationship is highly endangered when it comes to tech. And again, our children are not going to be able to engage fully in relationships if we don't do it ourselves. The last thing about digital mentors is that they tend to be proactive instead of reactive. And what the research is showing us is that most parents are reactive when it comes to technology. So again, this means sitting down and really thinking about, what does my family want when it comes to technology, and how are we going to put that in place? Okay, I'm going to just take you through 3 different age groups and talk about how we can be actively involved in their tech experiences. So with our 2 to 5-year-olds, we want to be sitting with them and we want to be co-viewing. When 2 to 5-year-olds tend to watch a movie or a show, they take in exactly what they get. So they're not picking up on any subplots. They take the words for exactly what they are. They tend to attribute physical characteristics to personality characteristics. So the witch is evil, as an example. At this age, if our children are viewing technology, we want to be very careful that we don't use our screens as a soother. So they're upset and we say, oh, it's okay, come here, let's watch a show. Because that soothing when they're 2 to 5 is something that they will continue on with as a habit. It will look different as they get older, but we want to be very careful that technology is not used early on as a soother. And as they're learning, as they're watching a show, it doesn't matter what it is, as they're watching that show, we want to then take whatever happened in that show and use it outside of that time. So afterwards, we might say, okay, we were watching Frozen together. Let's act out the part where they make a snowman together. So we're reinforcing some of the stories that they've learned. So we want to draw, we want to act, we want to bring it up again outside of that time. So we're helping with those storylines. Between the ages of 6 to 10 years old, this is actually my favorite age in therapy to use movies and videos and, even sometimes music that might be on YouTube. So we start looking at it and we say, okay, this is what we're seeing. What are the messages that we're hearing? So again, we just start very simply. And as they get a little bit older, we can make it a little bit more complex. But this is where we start saying, how do you think she's feeling? Or look at her face. It was so tight right there. It was really, really red. What do you think happened? So we start looking at movies. We use movies and stories to help to teach children about relationship, about values, about morals. It's a beautiful way to do it because it's not personalized. So we can say, oh, if we go back to Frozen again, we can say, oh, Elsa looked really, really stressed there. Look at what her body's telling us right now. What a wonderful way to teach our children. Again, at this age, what we see is that children aren't taking in subplots. They're still taking the story value for what it is and for what they're being told. The moment we get into those teen years, this is where we can really start to talk about subplots, about what media is telling us, about what it's not telling us, about how we're being drawn in, about our family values. Again, when I see my teenagers within therapy, a lot of the time I'm using media to talk about what's important to them, about how it connects with them, how it doesn't connect with them, some of those underlying messages. That being said, though, again, as much as possible, we want to be co-viewing with our children. When our kids, particularly 11 and up, when our kids feel as if they're being taught, they'll often tune out. So we need to be very careful that we're not over teaching or pointing things out too much. So we want to make sure that's an enjoyable experience. If they bring up something from the show, we can say, oh yeah, I remember that part. What did you think about that character? So we can bring it up then, but again, it has to be almost agendaless so that they're more likely to want to co-view with us. What happens when we run into conflict with our kids? So again, go back. Use that family media agreement. There are many parental controls out there. I talk about them in our tech course, which can be accessed on our online library at the Institute of Child Psychology. I will say to you, though, that I feel that communication, particularly from an early age with our kiddos, that communication is way better than parental controls. I can't tell you the amount of teenagers that I've had sit in the office with me and say, oh, my mom thinks that I cannot access my messages, yet I'm accessing them on this device. Eventually, what I see is that our teens tend to outsmart parents when it comes to parental controls. So I'm not saying don't use them. I'm saying be very, very careful, and that open communication is actually going to go way further than parental controls. Discuss those limits. Remember, connection first. So relationship always. We come in with warmth. When our children are upset, when we've said to them, this is a limit, we have to turn off the Xbox now. We'll talk about actually turning off devices in a minute. But when we've put in that limit and our children are really upset with us, that is not the time to be talking about rules and guidelines and what we're going to do in the future and the consequences. They cannot hear you because their stress response is up. When our stress response has been activated, our children cannot absorb information from us. So we want to wait to come in with guidelines, to come in with those conversations. Wait, connect with your kid, get them a hot chocolate, sit down, cuddle with them, and then come in with those guidelines and come in with those consequences if they are needed. If you're really struggling, go in and work with a professional who can help your family through this. Remember, relationship first. Those consequences are important, but we're not going to get our child long-term to work with their values, with our values, with really upholding what we need in terms of technology if that relationship is not there. So if it does feel like family life is suffering because of technology, go and talk to a professional. Get a little bit of help. One of the last things that I'm going to cover today is transitioning out of screen time. So this can be really hard. When our children are, for example, on the Xbox and they're playing a game, each time they kill an opponent, they have a little rush of dopamine. So dopamine is that feel-good hormone. It's the same thing that we get when we gamble, when we pull the lever on the gambling machine, or when we go shopping, or when we see a good friend that we haven't seen for a long time and we give them a big hug. Those are all little surges of dopamine. So our child has been on the screen and there's this intermittent reward schedule, so they never know when it's coming, so they're anticipating, when am I going to kill an opponent, and then they get that little squirt of dopamine. So they're almost in a little bit of a trance. Very often what happens when parents say, okay, we're turning off the screen right now, and the screen is abruptly cut off. What happens to our kids is there's a rapid decline in dopamine. And sometimes it can actually feel like physical pain to our kids. And then we see that massive meltdown for our children. If this sounds like your child, one of the things that I'm going to say to you is put in those limits if we need to, if that's what we've agreed as a family, put in those limits. Go and sit down next to your child. So let's say they get 20 minutes on the Xbox. Go and sit down next to your child 5 minutes before their time is up. Put your hand on their arm. So we're almost creating a bridge out of screen time to make that transition. Put your hand on their arm. Say to them, oh, tell me what's happening in the game. Remember, we only have a few minutes left. Oh, I see you got another point there. Okay, we have a couple of minutes. Let's finish off now. And then help transition them out so that hopefully what we can do is prevent some of that free fall. So we almost pull them out of that screen time together. So I think the biggest thing that I want to leave you with today is that it's not about one day. It's not about minutes per day. It's about balance over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Don't look to the professionals. Look to yourself and ask yourself, what do I want for my family? What do I want for my child? And what needs to happen? What do we need to put in place? You can do it. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our next Facebook Live. Have a wonderful day.